All right, hello, we're gonna get started. So appreciate everybody for making the trek down here. I know it's kind of hard to find this room. I didn't know where it was, so that was fun. Welcome to the Hellscape that is scraping legislative data as a open source project. Just out of curiosity, has anyone here been on any government website? And keep those hands up if you have enjoyed the experience and found what you were looking for. Cool, that actually really brings my point home. Well, you know, legislative data is nominally public. It does tend to be buried on opaque government websites, and our project attempts to load it all, normalize it, and make it easily searchable and enable legislative tracking across every state. My name is Rylie Johnson. My official title is software engineer, but I identify as more of a code gremlin. I typically break things more before actually figuring out a fix. I do circus stuff on the side and go to a lot of concerts. And I also talk really fast when I'm nervous, so bear with me. But also, you guys can go to other sessions during this time. So that'll work in your favor. I work as part of the data engineering team at Plural. We were formerly Civic until like a month ago. So still working on that, getting that rebranding out. And I've been there for over 3 years. And I've been working on open states for about 2 years now. Just to give you a glimpse of what my day-to-day kind of things look like. Here's an example of just, you know, one of my favorite things to look at every morning. This is a task runner for scraping North Dakota bills, and all of those red instances are 503 errors, which, if anyone knows, that is not my fault, and there's not a whole bunch I can do about it, but I have to deal with it anyways. Before we really get into the meat of it, I do have a disclaimer. I adore my job. This is not complaining. I really enjoy all of these. It's bizarre, and I love these different puzzles, but just highlighting some of the weirdness that we've encountered as a project. So what is Open States? It is the best and oldest source of US legislative data. It is 14 years old and the most thorough source of legislative data you can find that is open. We've got 200 plus scrapers for getting bills, legislators, committees, events, votes across 50 states, federal, DC, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. So typically I'm running about at least over 100 of these scrapers once a day, some every couple of hours. So I see all kinds of weird stuff. Here's a couple of examples of our repositories that are most popular. We've got a people repo, which is all YAML files of state legislators and governors. We've got our website is one, and then also our scraper repository, which is by far the most active one. We do all of this so that people can go to our site and easily see exactly what's going on at state and federal levels. You can check view bills, see what kind of sponsors there are, how many different versions there are, what kind of votes are happening on it, and how it moves through the legislatures. You can also view legislators and get their contact information, website, socials, all that kind of stuff if you need to get in contact with them. And if you make an account, you can subscribe to a bill and get emails when there are updates to that bill as it moves. But 14 years is a long time. It's gone through a lot of iterations. So we've been through a couple of different names before. And we originally got our start in 2009. And at that time, in order to try and find out information on bills, you'd have to go to the state's website, which is so pretty. I wish that I could say that this was from 2009, but I took this yesterday. So it's, all kinds of things. You can't really find a great way to find different types of bills for different legislatures. You can't really compare them across states. It's kind of a pain in the butt. But the idea really started at PyCon back in 2009, and they put out a call for volunteers to try and scrape this legislative data. Expected to get about 10 people that were interested in it, and ended up getting 40 plus. So that was how this project actually really started and kicked off. It got it became a part of the Sunlight Foundation, and so they actually got steady funding and participated in Google Summer of Code. They had an actual office, kicked off the project or our API so that people could access this kind of data in specific states. And it was good for a couple years until Sunlight had its sunset in 2016, and it wasn't really funded that much anymore. So we had the independent years where the founder, James Turk, was the main person running it. He worked on it with help from Tim Showers, who's the CTO of GovHawk and still a contributor to our project. But for the most part, they ran it independently with a couple of grants to keep the project going. But that was really when they had to delete a lot of the historic data. So if you look on our site, we've only got a couple of jurisdictions that go way back in time for bill data, but we do have a lot of the most recent stuff. But that started running out in 2020. And so this was an excerpt from a newsletter that went out, basically saying like, yeah, can't sustain this project anymore independently. So that was when Plural swooped in. I had been working at Plural for, I think, a year and a half at that point, doing getting open space data into Plural's platform, which is basically like Google Docs for legislation. It's very cool, but also I started learning about how weird these state sites are. So definitely appreciated all the work that they had done and had a little bit of experience getting into some of that weirdness. So when James brought the project to Plural and joined the team, I became his number 2 and got trained in on a lot of the scraper functionality and started getting into more of the other infrastructure. So since then, now we do have a data engineering team that's touching the project, so that block is slightly thicker. It is still mostly 2 of us that work on it on a day-to-day basis. So it's, but we can pull in other people as we need, so that's always nice. But since then, James has moved on as founder emeritus, which I don't blame him. He was working on this thing for 13 years, and that's exhausting. So definitely a good project. But so now it's mostly the engineering team and then also some public contributions and still Tim from GovHawk, so that's always cool. But to get back into the meat of what you guys really came here for, so we'll get back into some of that chaos. As you would know if you pay attention to any of the news, legislatures are super slow to evolve. How the process works can be so different across state borders, and standardizing the data is an absolute nightmare. There is some communication between the legislatures about like how to do this stuff. And originally during the independent era, James did a little bit of contracting through the state legislatures in order to digitize and standardize, but it didn't get super far. So there's definitely a lot of chaos that can happen there, including one in particular. So if you know how there's different bills that are trying, or like legislatures are debating on how, or like at the legislatures, there's one state in particular where instead of actually, editing and tweaking all of their bill versions as it goes, Kansas in particular has a statute where every bill version needs to be printed, which means that they need to print out the version of the initial bill, drive it to the legislature 2 hours away, let them edit it manually, pick that up, then bring it back to the printers, and then bring it back with the new updated version. It's very archaic, but it's still happening to this day. Instead of actually, like just going for like some online tweaking, but very fun archaic process. Also, specifically Massachusetts is one of our only states that we don't have vote data for because they don't publish it online. There is one company that has that vote data, and they charge quite a lot of money for it. They can actually just name their own price, which is kind of scary. Which we're pretty sure that they just send somebody to actually sit in on these committee hearings and record all the votes. So it's just one of those things where it's like, really, you guys can't put this up somewhere, but it is what it is, and people think that different data is more important than others. So it brings me to the first thing that I really learned working this job, and it's that legislative websites absolutely suck. I was just curious, has anyone here actually tried scraping a legislative? Cool, awesome. I really appreciate you guys. We can talk about this after and, commiserate together. But, it is hard to find information as a user, let alone find scrapable content on these pages. But, sometimes there are some really enjoyable and entertaining things that you do see. Like one of my favorites is having, these lovely, super clean landing pages where it's like definitely like updated web pages. And as soon as you find a bill that you want to look at, you get transported back in time. My favorite thing is the little Comic Sans for the hyperlinks. That's just quintessential, so good. But it works, so why would they change it? Which is cool for us because then we don't have to update scrapers for like a decade. But we also find all kinds of charming 404 pages because they don't have actual easy to figure out URL paths. Sometimes we get little messages from their own developers. I'm still kind of confused on what this is actually meant to say. That could be interpreted a couple of different ways. And I'm just here for it. But occasionally you'll have a state that implements an API, which is always a dream, where it's just like, that's just so much easier to scrape. But sometimes they're just kind of not ideal or implemented correctly. So we've had all kinds of fun times, just getting on, seeing these sites, and sometimes getting access. We absolutely have to be a little crafty about it. With this data impacting the public, you really think it'd be easy to get, but it's actually kind of surprising how many state websites have started implementing Cloudflare and anti-scraping software. And it's like, okay, yes, but also please don't, because this is essential data. And sometimes reaching out does get us access or whitelisted, but sometimes they actually just don't respond at all, or they block us in particular. But when the project was first starting, there was a very fun conference that we went to, and it was very still early stages, so we didn't have all 50 states yet. And one of the ones in particular that we didn't have was Illinois, but somebody complained to the right person at the right bar, and we ended up with a bar napkin with a address, a username and password for a read-only account to their server. So we used that in order to get the data. That is framed in James's office currently. So he still has it to this day. So that's been a really fun time. But also some websites are just so bad or take so long to load, we've had to forge calls to their not super public APIs. One example is Alabama. If you go on their site, they have actually a couple of different versions of their legislative site. This is the one with the most accurate and current session, but it's not super scrapable. So we've had to kind of forge our way through with writing some GraphQL queries straight to their site. But so when we can find a way, we do find a way. And when it does work well, we get it. But when it doesn't, that also tends to happen, which brings me to the second thing that I've had to accept working on this, and it's anomalies will occur. We do have a custom built task runner. That was the thing that you saw on slide 3. We will be sunsetting it. We've got some problems with it, but currently it auto creates issues so that we know when we should actually take a look at the scrapers failing after 5, because most of the time, like they're self-healing because somebody input the data wrong or something like that. So after 5 is when we've really decided that like it's worth it to try and take a look and see how it goes. But there's just a lot of times where I have this reaction where it's like, I don't even know what this error actually means. And sometimes it's just occasionally also my reaction to dealing with our infrastructure. But my favorite example of a weird anomaly that happened was for Puerto Rico. We scrape this Sutra app. It's very nice. They have a website for their Office of Legislative Services, which is very fancy. And then they have this separate app. There's a little button that I got cut off on the end that actually brings you to that application so you can see all the bill data. And we were getting a bunch of server not found errors on the scraper. So it was happening for a couple of days, and I reached out over email to see what was happening. And I got a bunch of cannot deliver to this. And that's to the organization website. It's not to the app at all. So I'm like, okay, they're like clearly offline. So I started like trying to like Google search to like see if there was something going on with funding for this, or like they were closing or taking a break or something. Couldn't find anything. So I got over my millennial fear of using phones and called, and no one answered. Like 6 times. It was like one of those where I'm just like, okay, what do I do now? There's nothing I can really do. So I gave up on that basically. It was just like, okay, I can't do anything about it until something moves. And then suddenly the app was back a couple of weeks later. No explanation, no reason, still didn't get any responses to any of that. So it's just, it's one of those things where I'm just like, okay, it's out of my hands. I gotta let go. But at least they do have a like nice application for their data. And that brings me to my next fact, one which I think we can all agree on, is that new tech is not always better. Clean websites are really nice to scrape, but APIs are always, ideal. They're always such a dream, usually. You'd think that like as more states are getting online and like figuring this stuff out, they would have, really solid APIs. They've got so much money, and they should be able to figure out how this technology stuff works. But occasionally they're so bad. This is an example of a bill scraper that I rewrote so that it didn't scrape the site. It uses their API. I don't know if anyone can see that, but my first commit was 2 years ago. This is still open because it craps out after an hour and a half because the server just cannot handle any API requests past that. And it's really a problem because scraping Massachusetts actually scraping their website currently takes about 36 hours to run. So it's astronomical. But it's like sometimes let's see. Yeah. So we have this for like new API issues. It's still super fragile, so we can't use it. But also new websites can also be super fragile. Like North Dakota from that first slide I showed you guys, that they just kicked off that new site like 6 months ago, but we've been having server issues, and I've reached out to them a couple of times and they've added resources to it, but still having issues. So that's always a fun time. And sometimes new APIs can also be a little bit too good, which I didn't think would be an issue. So for example, we were writing a new scraper to scrape legislators from South Dakota. You can tell that I super sanitized this. But you can see that it's, super easy to get the like really basic information that we needed, like first name, last name, what district they represent, address, phone number. But then we get into the kind of questionable things like home address, their spouse information, license plate. And then does anyone see the really big red flag? That is a social security number. So that was one where it was like, oh my gosh, you guys I guess you could have that as an internal thing that you think that people would not see, but why would you have that not blocked by HR? So we raised that as an issue with the webmaster, and they were thankful, but that was after we got a call from the State Bureau of Investigation to make sure that we weren't actually hacking them. So it was, right. I know. Tempting. Let me see. But all that being said, we've got some really weird stuff to deal with, but we do make it work for the most part. Sometimes we do have some bugs and broken things, but we do have a really comprehensive data set that is available to the public. But getting into more of the like open states ecosystem and running it as an open source project, like I showed you before, we've got a couple of different touch points, so you can get the data however you want. We've got openstates.org. We do have 2 APIs. We have a GraphQL one, which we are going to be retiring. And then our API v3. All of our code is publicly available on GitHub. So you can see anything that we do on there. And we do also have bulk CSV and JSON downloads or entire database dumps, just so that people have access to a lot of this data and can do like really comprehensive research on it. But our most popular site or page by far is our Find Your Legislator page, which gets millions of views every year. It allows you to look up your legislators by your address. This is Best Buy's representatives at the state and federal level. It has also been one of my biggest sources of pain and suffering since redistricting happened. It turns out getting shapefiles are just so damn hard. And it's still probably not entirely accurate, but we are fairly close. But since, we're a very limited team, we have limited resources on making sure that that is accurate. But like I said, millions of people hit this site and engage with us. We do have some really notable, prominent users of our data sources. I'm given a couple of them here. Most of them do analysis and kind of investigation around this stuff. But one of them in particular, ResistBot, is one of our biggest contributors for people data. They are responsible for any municipal data that we have, as well as executive, because we don't actually have scrapers for those. So it's really cool to see what kind of an impact this data has on like just being public. And we've got a lovely user quote if anyone wants to read that about how easy it is to see stuff. But it really does highlight how people are able to get into and interact more with the democratic process. We do have a couple of different ways to communicate with the project. We've got a email for people who are still interested in doing stuff like that. We do have a Slack instance and Matrix. We're looking at moving over to Matrix. We do also still have a Twitter, sort of. But if that's your thing, you can hit us on there. But most often people go through our issues repository. That is where anybody can flag issues with data. We do have templates, which is important, so that we can get more descriptions on what's going on. But that is pretty common. We do have a section for Q&A also there, so we can have some discussion with folks. We do have some pretty good documentation for getting started and like looking into the data and getting started on helping out, but could always use some work. I do have an Airtable that's set up for session information, so people can see that. They can see exactly like what states are scraping when, how long sessions are going, like if the people have been updated, things like that. So people don't come to me and being like, when is this doing the thing? And we do try to keep up with quarterly blog posts so people know what we're doing as a project. And then we do have a yearly summit. We just had one in January at UC Chicago. It was very cool. We had a summit and hackathon, so it was interesting group of folks. But we get, with all of these different touch points, we get all kinds of issues that get brought up. You know, we expect people to follow templates and help us in the right direction, but, you know, this is very common. This is bad to read. This is a example of an email that I get fairly often that says district ? With nothing in it. And I'm like, cool, what do you need? Like, or like somebody will be like, this is wrong. I was like, I would love to help you. I need more than that. So it's always been a very interesting time getting those emails. This one is also really fun. This was raised as a GitHub issue, and it's asking about a bill referring to specific circumstances. And I'm like, I don't know what bill you're talking about. I don't know if you're talking about something like, where are you, like, what state is this? Give me something. We do also get issues raised like we are the legislature. So this is a GitHub issue that is basically one of those copy and paste stuff about gun registration to legislators. It's like, yes, I support this, but I'm the wrong person that should not be getting this. I cannot help you. And this is always the kind of issue that breaks my heart a little bit because we just like our job is to aggregate the data and can't answer specific questions, but there are some people who reach out with specific concerns about bills and how it impacts them on a daily basis. So it's really showcasing that like people are being impacted by these things and are confused about what this actually means. This one in particular is about health coverage, and it's one of those things where like we don't have the resources to do the analysis. We're not the analysis company of this stuff. So we have to point them in the direction of the actual state legislature and remind them that we are just aggregating the information. But yeah, it's a very kind of heartbreaking time. But, you know, even with how all of this is, with sources being weird and not super helpful issues getting raised, another thing that I've definitely come to learn is that it is all worth it because it's making a difference for a lot of people and providing the opportunity to see a little bit more clearly what is happening with legislation. And if any of these problems or issues sound interesting to you, please help us. I am always happy to take on more people, and if you're interested in anything related to the project, I am happy to like help point you in the right direction. But yeah, we've been kind of floundering with contributions lately, so any help is appreciated. That being said, there are other public data sources on public policy that are specific to other types. So like if you're not interested in legislation, but you're interested in something else, there are a couple of different organizations where they're very set on making sure that this is all public information. We've got Open Secrets, which follows money and politics. We've got ProPublica, which does investigative journalism, and they do provide data sets on Congress. And then also we've got Ballotpedia, which is basically an elections wiki, so anyone can track what is going on for elections. But yeah, hope you enjoyed my pain and really appreciate y'all for coming out here.
So you mentioned that scraping the Massachusetts data takes 36 hours. And naively, I would think, oh, you just scrape like whatever the time span was of the last day or something since the last scrape. Why does it end up taking 36 hours?
Because it has to go through, like most of our scrapers, it hits the first bill list page. It pulls all of the different bills from that page and then goes to each individual detail page from there. So like, since their site is super slow, it just has like really bad response times on getting each of those individual bills. And also the pagination on it is kind of crap. So even getting the list of bills is always a pain in the butt. But yeah, good question. Yeah.
Do you know anybody perverse enough to be doing this at a county level?
Yes, I think there's definitely like groups that do try to do this kind of stuff. Props to them, because like that's insane. We do have some people who are interested in getting into more of like the municipal stuff, but I think that's gonna have to be like we're all gonna have to communicate and really push for that kind of stuff. So yeah, Code Switch.
So this is kind of like a macro question.
Yeah.
Is there any push for like a standardized data? Because these are the legislators that are. And so this is my argument. It's like when you do legislation, you have to do storytelling. So has your scraping showed positive results in influencing legislation? Then you communicate to legislators that this is important. And then standardization could do for counties, for state level, and really sort of build from there. So I can imagine an open source project of, building with states of, because a lot of legislators is about like their technology is falling behind. So it makes it easier to really update any type of thing because there's an open source. So yes, so there should be a legislative solution with storytelling and a bunch of things that could be powerful.
Yeah, I really wish. It's one of those where it's like it'd be nice if there was like a ruling body that made sure all of the states abided by these things, but there's not. So basically, it is all on the states to decide and communicate with each other. And I actually did have a developer from the Missouri House of Representatives reach out this week with improvements. So now we actually get to scrape an XML site instead of their actual website. But he also pointed out that there is through NCSL, there's also which is the National Conference of Legislators, state legislators. There's also they have an organization that is specifically for technologists in the area. So that is where like they have that chance to communicate and kind of dictate some of the standards that go into it. So there's some progress. We just need to make sure that we could actually keep communicating and keep that going. I want to go with you.
So following up on that, are there states that in your experience are actively working against making this data available? Or are they They're trying to avoid transparency?
Yes. And now that I've gotten the okay to give the states names, Indiana, they are a pain in the butt. They're the ones who have Cloudflare implemented and have blocked us repeatedly. So it's a fun time, but we get it somehow. So we got to make it work. But yeah.
Well, I'm not sure if I can put this in a form of a question, but I'll just say the last time I was in the Minnesota Senate gallery, I had a great conversation via pantomime with a Capitol Police officer who talked about when we were talking during the Restore the Vote thing. And there's a session later about this organization that does hot whatever. And so he was very clear via pantomime that I shouldn't drink clear water during a hearing 2 days ago. So cheers. You didn't mention Minnesota specifically, but I thank God there is no national standard.
I would say there's definitely worse. So could always be a thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to add, so back in 2017, Paul Ryan, they were trying to introduce the American Health Care Act, but they had created a marketing campaign to read the bill, like that was their thing. So like you would know, and anyone that gets in, I mean, it's actually really complicated because most bills reference several other bills, they change. So I actually built an application specific for that broke out everything in sections, referenced every other bill, past legislation related to that, all the definitions, and I contacted them and explained, like, hey, I support this, but it's really difficult to do. So here's this tool. And a day later, they completely changed. They created new marketing that was not read the bill. And they stopped. It was literally the next, like the next day, they got new domains and redirected everyone that I have it like in my notes somewhere, but it was a new name and they just stopped. So like, that's just the thing. It's like with government, even, I mean, it's cool to hear the ones that are like, you know, slowly embracing stuff, but it does seem that like across the board, and especially someone who mentioned county, city of Minneapolis, I think is doing comparatively a good job with what they're trying to do, but the county is one of the most regressive here. Like Hennepin County was trying to hide data. So I can't wait till we get to that point where we're pushing it.
Major props to you. We will definitely be chatting after this because I've got questions. Yes, in the back. No, Justin.
Yeah, thank you, Rylie. Just a really quick, because we get 2 mentions of city, county stuff. There's a project called cityscrapers.org that you can take a look at. Folks doing more municipal stuff.
Cool. Red glasses.
If you had a Fred at the federal level, what would make things easier?
Okay, so right now there's an issue with getting bill versions specifically for House resolutions, and I think it's Senate bills. So if they could just upload their versions, that'd be perfect. Like that's all I need. But they're very slow on it right now. There's like 1,000 bills that are just missing any type of bill text, which is important to know what's going on. So yeah, that would be ideal. But yeah.
Are there any states or countries that do a really good job of providing this data?
Not that I know of, which is not super encouraging. But yeah.
So my question is, how easy or difficult is it to get Minnesota's data?
Great question. For the most part, it's pretty good. We've got a lot of customers that are based in Minnesota, so it's like one of our highest priority jurisdictions to like get fixes in. The only thing that I know off the top of my head that we don't have is Senate votes, because they have them on a PDF, and those are pains to scrape. It is possible, but we just haven't gotten around to it yet. So yeah, in the back.
I'm curious, what is the, red states versus blue states?
Yeah. I would say that there is a difference, but not like it's always the ones that you think are going to be really great and really easy that are actually the biggest pains in the butt. I was gonna say, yeah, Massachusetts, California actually is one of our like weirdest scrapers. I still don't know what is happening on that file. So that is definitely one where it's just like, I don't understand. But yeah, it's definitely, there's bad on both sides, but there's still some really good ones. But yeah, in the plaid.
How often are you running into terms and conditions that you have to agree to while you're scraping, or your scraper has to agree to, and how does it affect your?
Yeah, sometimes we can just get like an API key, register for and like have user agreements on that kind of stuff. Not a whole lot. There's not like people haven't come after us really, except for like maybe if they think that we did something wrong, because they can track that kind of stuff. But or like if we raise issues with them, like there was a SQL injection on Main's site and we brought it up and they thought we were doing it. So yeah, it's been a fun time.
What is your funding channel? So like, from my understanding, if you're scraping all this information, now you have kind of like a monopoly of this data, and there's all these lobby groups that spend a ton of money. So can you take some of that?
Yes, actually, since that was a bullet that I skipped because I was going too fast. Now that we've got or we're part of Plural, it is VC backed. So we get to enjoy that process. For better or for worse. Yeah.
You said you are working on an API. Is that something that's available to developers? Is it open source?
Yes. Yeah, all of this is open source. So anyone can make contributions, use our API. You can just make an account and you get an API key automatically, even if you're just trying to track bills. So you just have to create an account on OpenStates and you can get all the access to it.
Do you know if you're going to do another hackathon next year, or is that just like too far out?
Potentially, if there's enough interest, yeah.
Yeah.
How much does the courts impact what bills, like, because the court can like repeal or modify things, does that go through on the legislative sites at all?
No. So most of our stuff goes through committee. Or so it's committees instead of courts. But that's because it's like the legislature, not the judicial system. So.
So you're not worried about the Computer Fraud Act at the federal level or the state analogs to that?
I'm kind of oblivious, I'm not gonna lie. So they'll get me when they get me. Which is probably not the right attitude to have. But yeah, no, I've definitely, especially with like the TikTok ban, I've definitely been more concerned about like that bill, just of how that impacts everything else. But they're panning it off as that kind of stuff. But yeah, fun stuff. Yeah.
Does your user interface allow seeing how bills morph or change over time, like GitHub for code, especially if you could have a git blame for a
Yes, we do, as long as it's available on the legislature site. Most of the time we scrape all of the different bill versions that are available, which usually points to like what committee's editing them or things like that. So there is kind of a little bit of a blame going on with that. We don't have bill text available on open states, which is, not super ideal. But that was also kind of a pain point when I was working for Plural. We have standardized bill text across jurisdictions, and holy crap. So that is like standardizing all of the bill text has always been fun. But like, yeah, trying to figure out like what's inserted, what's deleted text, all that jazz doesn't necessarily happen on open states, but it's a pain anyways. Yeah.
You showed us an example that had like social security number and the results you get back. How often do you run into situations where you find data that you're like, oh, this should not be here. This is not like good that this is here.
Yeah, not super common, which is nice. Like it's actually kind of surprising. More often we get data that's missing. So it's always harder to point to stuff that's gone. But yeah. Cool. Yeah.
What's your first recourse when data is missing? What is your first step typically when you find gaps? You're concerned about, just what doesn't seem to be showing up. Suspicion, distrust.
Yeah, definitely. So what happens when it's not there? I will try and find any possible source that I can scrape to get this, but I have reached out directly to them sometimes, and some people are responsive. Like the guy from Missouri was like, reach out if you see anything missing, let us know and we can tweak it, so it can be more of a collaborative process, but it's not super common. But since I've taken over the project, I've been mostly focusing on maintaining it, and we're getting into more data sources now. So, and like actually really filling out our catalog. We're going to try and get kind of a report card out so people can see exactly what data is available from which jurisdictions and exactly like nail down all the specifics that you can get. And we have available, but not there yet. Yeah.
This is more of a question about the relationship between Plural and open states. So the tax system is complicated, and there are for-profit companies that sell services to navigate the tax system. And it sounds like Plural is essentially doing that with legislative data. And it feels like there's potentially, a similar conflict of interest where Intuit, right, fights simplification of the tax system because its business profits off it being complicated. Given that Plural is venture-backed, does Plural have a position on its relationship with legislative transparency and how it's going to navigate that in the future?
Yes. We have a mission at Plural to make legislative data accessible for all. We really believe in democratizing data, and so we've committed to an open core. So open states will remain free and public and transparent and open source so that people do have access to this data. But we just, like, Plural as an app has built on top of that. So that if people want more enhanced tools, then yeah, it's behind a paywall. But for the most part, like, having access to this data is going to be free forever. So. But yeah, I'm gonna call it because we're over time. But if anybody has any questions, feel free to flag me. Thank you so much for coming.